In the journey of life, every step informs who we become. But so does every barrier. As does every experience, good and bad. But more than anything, every opportunity provides steps, remove barriers, nurture positive experiences, and present opportunities.
Hello?
Kanisha,
Yes?
I'm just calling to congratulate you. The board has selected you to be their new CEO.
Because we all deserve to become who we envision. BIPOC Executive Search, your human resource. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today in our conversation about future-proofing EDIA work against political and social shifts. I'm your host, Melissa Sumnauth, coming in from Treaty 13th Territory, the background in humanity-centered people practices in intentional organizational design, leadership development, and people and culture practices. I'm also a partner here at BIPOC Executive Search. We'll put forward now our land acknowledgement. We want to make sure that, we're moving forward in action towards that. And I'll read it from here. Indigenous communities have always known that being in good relations with peoples, creatures, and the land is integral to well-being. In the spirit of living in kinship and community, land acknowledgements are not only a means of declaring sovereignty and treaty rights, but are also a way for all people to feel more connected to a place. BIPOC Executive Search was established in Tikaranto, a Mohawk word that translates to the place in the water where the trees are standing. It has been and continues to be the home of the Chippewa, the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and many other First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The area covered by Treaty 13 is signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. For time immemorial, the lush waterways, rich soils, and purifying effects of the Great Lakes ecosystem have made it a place of abundance for food, medicines, knowledge and cultural exchange, and commerce for Indigenous peoples. For those of us at the firm who are non-Indigenous, we will commit to honoring Indigenous ways of being and knowing by slowing down to examine our relationship to land, ecology, and ancestry. We will research and learn about the original caretakers of the land we are occupying. We will reflect on when and how we arrived at this land. We know that being in action towards truth and reconciliation is the good way forward. I'd like to now introduce you to my colleague, Jason Murray, who is the president, founder, and managing partner of BIPOC Executive Search. We're going to have a discussion today. Welcome, Jason. Great to see you.
Thanks so much, Melissa, and thanks everyone for joining.
Jason, just to help start us off here in our discussion, we know that these times can feel uncertain, especially given the chatter around EDIA. And of course, having been in the workforce, both of us for over 20 years, combined, it's over 40, but we're no stranger to times that are tougher. And so opening up a firm like ours couldn't have been easy to have done in the height of COVID. Why did you open up the firm?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think a great question to set the stage for all of the other things that will come up. I'd probably point towards a few different reasons for why I opened up the firm. One reason would be that when I looked around the landscape in terms of who is involved in recruitment work at the executive level, which is very, very niche work, I was one of the few that came with some of the positionality pieces that I come with. So one, of course, on the ethnocultural side, being Black, on the side of being part of the 2SL LGBTQ plus community. And what that means is when there are individuals in certain communities that are looking for examples or that are looking for access, because I have access to a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, individuals are able to come into access around information if there are spaces, let's say, people like them might be a part of, right? So I wanted to make sure that I can open a firm that can carve out the narrative, et cetera, and make sure that people had access to this information. Believe it or not, there have been people in my career that have done great work that I would call sometimes, and they would say they've never been called by a recruiter for a role at the executive level. And most of their leadership ascendancy has been people within their own environment tapping them on the shoulder as opposed to people from outside. I would also say that in opening up the firm, really wanted to make sure that systems and organizations realize that a plurality of voices around tables is what truly helps organizations to thrive and grow and also helps systems to change. But then finally, I would say that during the pandemic, I know a lot of the conversation was around the Great Resignation.
Mm.
I came up with a term that kind of borrows from it called the Great Discoloration. There were a lot of individuals that are from marginalized communities, many of them Black, many of them Indigenous, many of them people of color, that were let go from jobs during the pandemic time in very large numbers. That to me was quite concerning and kind of telling as well in terms of the way perhaps some individuals within organizations are viewed over others. So those are a couple of examples of the reasons why.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing around that. I heard access and systems and who gets tapped onto the shoulder and who gets shown the door. So really appreciate that. Oh. Sorry. Which leads us to the next the next question, which is, given the increasing resistance to EDIA, how can organizations ensure their equity efforts remain sustainable?
Another great question. One thing that I would say, and I do say it to people from time to time, a large part around why some of this work doesn't end up being sustainable in some organizations is because individuals that were in roles that brought some of these roles on had the wrong way of looking about what this role is really about, right? So someone coming in to do a role that's focused on DEI work. And a lot of what has led to organizations bringing on the role has been a bit more on the side of symbolic gesturing or symbolic response. And what that means is if the role is looked upon in that way, then if people don't have that same way of thinking over time, then the role might not necessarily be looked at as being as important. And therefore, it might be diluted in terms of it being sustainable within an organization. But I often like to make sure that people really understand that this work is about the design, not about the department in and of itself. So it has to be more than just that moral compass. We have to think about the role as being something that's integral to strategy, to business operations, and to growth. And so if we look at the varying functions within an organization, I often say that DEI work is as integral as some other areas such as finance. So if you think about the marketing department, for example, what pieces can a DEI person bring to a marketing department to make sure that there is proactive decisions being made as opposed to reactive decisions that have to come about because something about the marketing output is wrong? Or if you look at something like facilities, what DEI perspective can be brought to facilities in the arena of things like accessibility? If you look at something like legal, there are so many pieces when it comes to legal that can be prevented if there is an equity lens that is being brought forward. And the list goes on when you think about IT and what privacy means, when you think about something like finance and pay. So there's a number of areas that DEI work needs to be integrated in to make sure that an organization is able to sustain not just the DEI pieces, but all the other functions and the overall business on the whole.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Now, the effort to withstand some of these blows can be exhausting. So, amid all of this noise, what are some of your go-to techniques that help you stay grounded and in a good mindset?
It is very difficult to stay grounded and in a good mindset. I'm not going to mince words there. It's very, very tough times that we are in. And any organization that's focused on equity work or any individual that's focused on equity work is going to be feeling that as a human. What I would point towards is the importance of anchoring our mindset in purpose and not performance, right? So really just meditate on that, anchoring in purpose and not performance, because sometimes when we go about doing our work, we're often thinking about the performance side in terms of being able to focus in on what the output is all the time. That's obviously really, really important, of course, overall. But when it comes to sustaining ourselves in this work, we need to actually focus more on the purpose side. And that is to be able to say that we're anchoring in our why, in terms of why we're doing the work that we're doing, rather than how it's being received. Because if we pay too much attention to how it's being received, those can be the pieces that really start to cause that stress, that overwhelm, and then sometimes sometimes saying that it's something that you're not able to sustain yourself in. So anchoring in the why is where I would really want everyone to really focus on, especially
Anchoring in the why. We know that's such a sustaining of momentum as well as purpose. So really appreciate that. Now, moving on to our next curiosity for you, Jason. How should leaders respond to external pressures, such as political or legal challenges that threaten DEI progress?
Yeah, a really, really great question, Melissa. Thanks for this. There's a number of things I can point toward. So maybe the first thing that I would say is politicians change and regimes change. And so, while there are regimes currently that are definitely causing a lot of strain around a lot of this work, I would say to any individual organizations to be careful not to be too reactive to all of that. And for a number of reasons, even when I think about, younger cohorts being millennials or Gen Zers, it's a lot of research that shows where these particular cohorts have their thinking around a lot of this work. So even if I were to focus on the Gen Z population in particular, there are statistics such as 77% of Gen Zer say DEI is a factor when considering a new job. That's pretty huge, right? And if we're thinking about workforce related pieces, if you are an employer that's going to make bold steps to step away from a lot of this work, I think the long-term question that needs to be asked is, who am I potentially alienating, or who am I no longer able to attract? And 77% rather, is a large number. There's another percentage that says 83% of Gen Zers believe a company's commitment to DEI is important, again, when choosing an employer from another source, right? So one says 77%, another source says 83%. And so again, if organizations are not thinking about things long-term, but are reactive to something that is in the moment and right now, what are the long-term consequences? And I often think about long-term consequences where the internet is concerned. People don't forget the internet doesn't forget. you things that are making their way to the internet today will be there 10 years ago, 20 years, generations that have. So these, in my opinion, to um, more in terms of what that means in the long term. But then also too, what I would also say is, DEI work is really about, again, that proactivity as opposed to being reactive. And so when we think about some of the political and legal challenges of today that threaten DEI progress, I would always encourage people to think about the fact that the proactivity is part of why they should really continue to be committed to this work. And not reactive again to what might be happening on the government or political side of the table.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that so much, Jason, especially that piece around, the regimes change. And so being proactive versus reactive helps us withstand some of these blows that are coming. Thanks so much for that. Really appreciate it. Okay, we're going to play a quick clip and then we'll be back with a few more questions.
How does it all work? Our portal operates on a subscription model with discounted rates available as more employee profiles are set up. Each employee profile includes a set number of job posting slots, degree verifications and candidate background checks, and access to various unlimited features across the platform. While our team is still available to manage executive searches requiring third-party consultant involvement and proactive outreach, we recognize that some of your recruitment files are best handled in-house. Having our inclusive recruitment techniques at your fingertips will enhance the recruitment processes.
Amazing. So that's a little bit of a sneak peek of our BIPOC Executive Search client portal. Really interesting information there. A lot of love and labor was poured into the client portal, which we're really excited about. Which leads me to my next curiosity. What can organizations do to prevent DEI work from being perceived as divisive?
Oof, such an important question. Yeah. I often say that with anything that anyone advocates for, there's a process through which that particular piece someone's advocating for journeys through. So the first part of the journey is the piece is being socialized, right? So with respect to the importance of equity work, it's something that is socialized in terms of becoming more commercial, more as part of someone's everyday narrative, et cetera. Then there is a time where it's politicized, and that's the phase that we're in right now, right? Politicized. And when it is politicized, that's when there is conversation around it being divisive, right? So it's not divisive, but people will, for the benefit of their own agendas, will raise the matter as something that divides, even when it's something to actually make sure that we can raise the tide for all, because there are many individuals that we need to hear from too. Over time, the hope is that it gets to a point where it's normalized, right? So socialized, politicized, and then normalized. The normalized part comes when people start to learn more and more that it's actually not divisive. And what we can see happening in the world right now is there are actually a lot of hearts and minds that are opening up to the importance of this work. And oftentimes people's hearts and minds open up more and more when they are directly impacted. And a lot of individuals that did not think that this work was important or is important are individuals that perhaps weren't impacted up close in any way, shape, or form. And now that they are being impacted, we are seeing, for example, every second weekend, a lot of outcry in terms of protests and uprising, as people really want to make their voices heard around much of this. And so what that tells me in terms of the sequencing that I often think through is that it will become more normalized for people it wasn't normalized for yet, right? If I'm speaking for myself, and I know, Melissa, you share this as well, someone who works here and is so exceptional what you do. This is our everyday life, right? In terms of it being something that is essential, something that we know benefits everyone. But there are people who have not gotten to that point yet. And some weren't able to, even if they're being taught by people like myself and people like yourself, but start to get to that way of thinking again once they are directly impacted and directly affected. So, yeah, what can organizations do to prevent DEI work from being perceived as divisive? It's really important to think about it through those particular steps and say, we're at a point right now where there are forces that are trying to make it divisive. But if we look at all the individuals being impacted, that's not what we want for our organization. That's not what we want for our customers. That's not what we want for our users, for our clients, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And so we have to be careful not to be a part of promoting the division, because you become a part of promoting the division when you actually start to align yourself. This is based on those who are actually causing the divide.
Really powerful stuff. We are stronger together. And when we rise together. There's no exceptions to that. There's no exceptions. And I really love that piece that you talked about in terms of socialize, politicize, which is what we're in right now, and then normalize some of it. And bring folks along the journey with us too. Everyone benefits from this. Thanks so much for that. So next question, I've heard folks say this in terms of what gets measured gets done. And so wondering, how can organizations measure the success of their DEI efforts in ways that withstand scrutiny?
Yeah, and the data pieces are really important here. And data can be measured in many different ways. So of course, data can be measured in a quantitative sense, but then it can also be measured in a qualitative sense. So what do people have to say? And where things like employee engagement is concerned and surveying is concerned, one way is certainly to gather feedback from employees and staff in terms of, their sense of belonging, and whether they feel inclusion is truly embedded in the work and in the environment. So that'd be an example on the qualitative side. And certainly there are a number of things that can be looked at in terms of the quantitative side. So certainly when it comes to things like workforce, demographics, who is coming to the table more and more. With respect to our firm, we recruit from all ethnocultural backgrounds. We want to hear from everyone. We outreach to everyone. What we make as our value proposition is to truly be able to say that everyone is, in fact, represented before a decision is made. And so organizations can certainly do similar when they're looking at their hiring practices just over time, trying to see trends, right? But I also always say to clients, you don't want to just look at your trends in terms of the here and now. You actually want to go back in time, right? So if you can go back even 10 years, even 15 years, try to see if you can evaluate who was a part of the organization, who was a part of the board, who were the people that you would hear from quite often when you actually had something going out to market, and now start looking at some of what is on the table to be able to say, where were you? Where are you now? Right? I think too often people are just focusing in on the now, but that's why history is so important, to be able to measure how are things different? How are things changing? You can also look at things as well around attrition rates. So if we really want to measure the success of DEI efforts, we really want to get a sense of, retention. And if people are leaving an organization in high numbers, in exit interviews or just taking stock of the data to see, what are the ages or what's the ethnocultural background or anything that can just give you a sense of whether or not the efforts are successful. And then there's other areas like pay equity, of course, and representation on teams, et cetera. There will be individuals who will, want to scrutinize DEI work, whether it is something that they are scrutinizing in small circles or whether they're doing it a bit more of a public way within their organization. I don't think that that's something that's going to be entirely removed from our everyday experiences. But again, if you can really demonstrate the data to show the success, and if you think about some of what I brought up in terms of varying functions within an organization, and how this work should be integrated into the conversation, even those functions are going to be able to say, working in partnership with individuals who have a really strong lens or experience with DEI or equity work, here's how we're actually seeing things benefit all the more.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate that perspective around, anchoring in the facts. And the facts could be qualitative, it could be quantitative in terms of how you measure and withstand some of that scrutiny. Thank you, Jason. Next curiosity for you. What's your biggest piece of advice for organizations that want to future-proof their DEI work?
Yes. Ooh, I love this question. And I know that it is in the title, right, in terms of future proofing. And so this is a very important question. And it might sound trite. It might sound like something that we have heard said in some way, shape, or form. But it has to be a part of the strategy. It has to be a part of the strategy. I know that we, again, are focused on our moral compass, and that is something that has to be a part of it for sure. Being human-centered in the way that you're looking at, your leadership or organization. But certainly you want to align equity work and DEI work with business objectives. And that can be in a plurality of ways. So if an organization is thinking about the importance of making inroads with all sorts of communities so that they can continue to grow, they can continue to expand, that actually is something that means you have to integrate an equity lens. Because if you look at the mosaic of what the world is, if you look at the different countries, if you look at the different cultures, et cetera, you cannot expand and be a part of different markets, et cetera, unless you are bringing them into the conversation and working in partnership, and we'll use words like co-create, et cetera, and really make sure that individuals feel truly seen by the organization. Any organization that is within different markets, whether or not they know that they're engaging in DEI related work, that's why they're able to expand, because they actually are, right? When it comes to things like cultural competency and cultural sensitivities, if you do not know how best to interact with individuals that you might be corresponding with the first time in different environs in different parts of the world, you're going to actually limit your opportunities with respect to expansion and being able to do great work together. We certainly see right now when it comes to the stock market, when it comes to trade, when it comes to tariffs, et cetera, that a lack of DEI and a lack of equity and a lack of, being able to think about others and not yourself is the reason why you will have some things starting to fray. And so, by having, again, that lens and actually call it as it is, people should actually be able to say, that is actually equity work, that is DEI work, as opposed to saying, oh, it's divisive and it's not supposed to be a part of our environments. People can call it whatever they want, but that's in fact what they're doing. And so that's one of the biggest ways, really aligning DEI with business objectives, because this really ensures that DEI efforts directly support and are a part of any business outcomes. It truly makes it something that's indispensable. So that's one area that I would highlight. And to make it future proof as well. Some of the stuff that we spoke about in terms of some metrics type of pieces, some data type of pieces. I think that it's really important to establish what those clear metrics are so that there can be some accountability for the department, but for others as well. And so when I talk about different functions in an organization and I say how DEI can be inextricably linked with the work of those functions, now you actually create metrics. So when you are working in partnership with marketing, what are some of the metrics that can actually be put on the table, or the KPIs? When you are doing work with facilities, let's actually carve out some metrics in terms of, we've done an inventory of space. We really need to make sure that we can move the needle on X, Y, and Z. Here's when we want to do it by. Here are the resources that are needed, which means we need to go to finance, which means we need to go to IT, because that's obviously interwoven into all things facilities today, and so on and so forth. To future-proof it as well, I would definitely say that it's important to make sure that inclusive leadership is actually fostered, right? So it's really making sure that people see the importance of coming into environments with human-centered leadership. And the more we know that individuals that are coming into environments are thinking in this way, then we know that the work is sustainable. We can see an example of, it doesn't take much for work to completely be derailed when you have the wrong leader. So if you want things to be future-proof, and you want things to be sustainable, you have to make excellent and informed decisions on who is able to make some really important decisions, because it affects everyone. So I would say future-proofing it means, what can be set up in the design to make sure that whoever comes into positions are individuals that are really going to be thinking in an equitable and inclusive way. And the other thing that I would say in terms of future proofing is really making sure that you're evolving and adapting the strategies and the approaches. So I know that we just shared a commercial from our client portal. That's a perfect example, right? We want to be able to sustain the work. We want to be able to still be around, to know that communities that know we're needed feel that we're always going to be here for them and for everyone else. And so that means adapting. You can't do it the same way all the time. So if there are forces at play that are telling of what can come if the adapting doesn't happen, if you want it to be future-proofed and sustained, what needs to change? And so what we said is, we need to develop a technology. We need to give people the tools. We need to be more open source. We can't hold all the secrets. We got to give them away so that we know that people say, I now have what I need, even if Melissa, Jason, and all these other wonderful people at BES aren't in the room, so that I can sustain this work. Because I don't have to be speaking to them directly to do it. They've given me the tools, and 365 days throughout the calendar year, those tools keep showing up on this portal. So adapting and evolving, reading what's going on and shifting so that people can then say, we tried to get DEI to go away, but it looks like they're ahead of us in terms of why it is not.
Ooh, I feel like that last part was a mic drop too, Jason. Really appreciate that. And, that resonates so much around, embedded in strategy. And we're seeing organizations that are doing that, associations as well, that are doing that good work. And so I love that in terms of put some focus and energy towards that, because as we know, where your focus goes, your energy flows, and that's where things grow. So really appreciate it. The inclusive leadership as well of who sets the tone. So we've got this macro strat plan where you're embedding it there, and then your leader are part of who's going to feel seen and feel like they belong, because we know when people feel like that, they show up as their best. And when we're thinking about labor, the efforts that we put towards that, isn't that what organizations want? I think so. Yeah, I think so too. Okay, last curiosity for you, Jason. Toronto is one of the most diverse cities in the world. And we've spent the last few years deepening relationships with brilliant organizations and candidates. Our firm is seen as a beacon of hope for so many. I know I've heard that from so many people over the years. Why do you think we're seen in this way?
Wow. First of all, thank you to everyone who is watching who has said this to us. It is a part of what keeps us going as well. So I will say, in terms of being able to sustain ourselves in this work, when people pour into us like that, I'm telling you, it is something that makes the world of a difference. So thank you for this question, Melissa, and thank you for people who breathe life into us, which informed the question even coming up. I think people feel this way for a couple of reasons. One is that people want true connection. We as human beings need to actually feel like we are in community and connecting with people as a part of our survival, our evolution, and our growth. And sometimes that is removed from the equation when people are interacting with other individuals that have a job to do, right? And so sometimes people might come into a conversation with people who are doing recruitment work and feel like they're being tested, feel like they're being scrutinized while they're in conversation, and feel like they are having to prove themselves and their worth. I know that every single person here, and it can be people on our delivery team, or it can be people who are in operations, it can be people who are marketing, it does not matter, research, you name it. Every single person here focuses on making sure that people feel and know that they are not only seen, but they are worth time, energy, and being poured into as well. And people tell us all the time, which is why the question, right? So people want connection. It's just a cornerstone of being human. People want to know that they leave conversations energized. So people will come into a conversation thinking, I'm here to be tested, I'm here to prove myself, I'm here to show up and say, I'm worth it. And then they leave conversation saying, I'm energized, I feel I can do anything. I feel like I have people who are going to be in my corner and on my side, not just in the now and moment, but far into the future. People I feel also want novelty, right? So I think that when they're in conversations with us, they feel like this is different. This feels different. When people are seeing things that end up being posted, right? And I know that we have folks here on our marketing team. I'm going to shout out folks like Stacy Ann, Avery, et cetera, and of course the entire team that does work to help us determine what goes up in the world. People come into conversations with folks like yourself, Melissa, and me after and say, I feel like I already know you. Like, I feel like I know you. Thank you for putting your humanity out into the world, because it means that when we are speaking now, I already have a sense of what this conversation might look like and feel like. And then I would also say that people, want a space to be themselves, right? So when they know that they see us being ourselves, they know that they have an invitation to mirror that back. And so, why do I think that people over the years, say a number of these types of things. I would wrap it up into those pieces. People want connection. People want good energy exchanges. They want something that's novel because there's so many other examples that just feel like it's one of the same. And they want to be them. And people discover sometimes who they are just by having conversations with the right people. And what a gift that is to give someone in one conversation. Like I've had people that have actually said to me, oh my God, this one conversation is causing me to reflect on all these types of things that I can do going into the future. And I did not know that I would get that when I was applying for a job. So there it is.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I've heard that from about everyone here too, in terms of the exchange, what it's anchored in. I agree with you. I think that, some folks do respond well to conversations being more of a grilling. I think many more folks respond even better when it's values in motion. Sure, I could talk to you all day about being curious, but do folks feel that in a space with me? And then you're right, that energy exchange, it feels different as well. And I agree. We hear this a lot and feel really proud about that. So thank you so much
Yeah.
for all the insights, Jason.
Yeah, and to the point that you just made, Melissa, of course, we have to assess people, right? So, the terminology in terms of like the grilling side, and people don't feel grilled, but we are still assessing. But the thing is that when we come into conversations so interpersonal, it actually allows people to answer questions so much better. And it really gives people permission to truly dig into their experience to help connect dots that might not necessarily be verifiable right away because they feel opened up. They feel inspired. When you are going into any discussion where it's going to feel antagonistic or it's going to feel like someone's going to be highly scrutinized, that can actually close people and cause them to shrink, which means you're not going to get the very best out of them. There can be people who have tremendous experience, lots and lots of things to actually show on their resume. That can also be people who really shrink and don't do their very best work in terms of selling themselves if it's the wrong tone on the other side. Again, because we're human and sometimes that happens, right? So yeah, I think that's something that's come to mind for me as you were speaking. But maybe a question for you, Melissa, because I know that you asked a question in terms of why I opened the firm, but being someone who has been doing great work here at the firm, maybe you can share with people what had you join the firm, what sustains you in terms of someone that continues your work at the firm.
Thank you so much for that question, Jason. I appreciate it. I believe that our existence in this space and time is sacred. The chances that our parents should meet and give birth to us and we should live and grow and have met during this timeline, I think is also special. And so the way that, I had already a good understanding of who I am, which then makes it even easier to call in other folks, right, that are also thinking in that way. And so when you and I met, it was very much a conversation like that. Look, I've been in people and culture practices for a really long time, before it was called people and culture, when it was called HR, right? And when I think about your human resource or anchoring humanity in every practice, I definitely got to learn what I don't want to do, which means conversely, I got to know really up close and personal of what I do want to call in. And in that conversation, it was all about, every person has unique superpowers that adds to the collective. And in that conversation, I knew, okay, this isn't just someone that's opening up this firm on a whim. This is someone that's thought about this, that has lived this, that has seen similar things to me as well. And I thought, okay, I can be a part of this. So that's part of why. And then, of course, I got to meet everyone else at the firm too. And let me tell you, these are incredible human beings that are all paddling the canoe in the same direction. I remember when I first started here, there was this African proverb that I had shared. You might remember, Jason, where it went like this: if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go further, go together. And so I feel really lucky to be going together with these folks and yourself. So that's part of the reason why I joined the firm, why I continue being with the firm as well. I too grew up at a time where, hey, why doesn't anyone look like me in leadership? Hey, why doesn't anyone that looks like me or you or any of the wonderful souls that are at this firm, why don't we look like that on boards? I don't understand. Of course, we know in BIPOC communities, there's absolutely merit and intelligence, right? Um, and so I knew that that was about a systems that are at play. Uh, and, being able to impact systems in positive ways, I think is a really good thing. And I think that a lot of the folks that work with us, whether it's candidates or clients, feel that too, because we are doing things differently. We're not a cookie cutter. And I think that's part of where innovation comes from too. So that's part of the reason why I joined the firm, which anchors in my why, right, of changing systems. I love that post that just came out from West Hall that talked about us and saying about, absolutely access and systems. It's how you embed it in. So that's that first part. So thank you so much. And then what helps sustain me in this work? I do think anchoring in why and purpose, it's bigger than just me or you. It's bigger than us. And that I think is highly motivational and inspiring. So anchoring in why absolutely 100% keeps me going. I also recognize that if I scan the environment for what's bad, I'll find it. If I scan the environment for what's good, I will find it. So it's which one do I want to focus on, right? That's part of what helps me sustain in this work. What do I want to focus my energy on? My existence here on this plane is limited. I know that. So how do I want to feel? What do I want to bring to life in this existence that we have here? Given that we are all interconnected and bound together in this space and time. What do I want for me and you and all of our nibblings and our kin and our connections? This is what I want. There's a video that I remember posting a few years ago, and it talked about wanting to be the change that I want to see. Right. So that's part of it, alongside this wellness toolkit of mine. And let me tell you, I've been, there's all kinds of things that I've been pulling from in this toolkit. And of course, a lot of my background is in executive coaching, facilitation type work. I'm also a neuroscience nerd. And, I know that a lot of us, me included, can jump into our amygdala real quick, right? That part of our brain that wants to keep us safe, that says danger, ooh, safety. And then if you think about intersectional identities and how we move in the world, that amygdala can go online even quicker, right? Is this safe for me? So that sustaining is, okay, how do I bring myself back into my executive judgment brain? How do I move from the stress cortisol hormones to oxytocin? What do I need to do in terms of moving my body? So sustaining the work, it looks like all shapes and forms. Most recently, it was getting out into a forest and close to the waterways where the trees stand. So thanks so much for that, Jason. Appreciate it.
I love it. I love it. And I'm so glad, Melissa, that you shared all of that because, for people watching, I think it really just demonstrates how interchangeable we all are here. People often say, it doesn't matter who I'm in a conversation with. I feel inspired. I feel like there's something that they shared with me that's going to sit with me. I want to be an ongoing relationship with everyone as I meet the next person. And that just comes through so well, Melissa, as you share all of those pieces. I think, the last thing that I would share just in terms of, the overall future proofing is to really stand in your convictions. It is very, very hard right now, even for us, right? We're not immune to the fact that this particular climate is one where it's difficult to do our work, even when we tell people it's work that is inclusive of everyone, right? We have so many examples of every single type of individual imaginable that are not only on lists, but are actually being put into roles through our efforts. And the name on the door is to make sure that individuals who really need to know that we are wanting to have this cohort also come to the table, et cetera, is very, very clear. And we've heard from so many people that that is the case. But again, standing in one's convictions in terms of this work is important, that our environments, such as this one, are important, and really making sure that you are compelled to prove that it's going to be sustained. And so, yeah, sometimes, I will say, and, I think it was Trey Anthony who said it when she spoke at Best Fest last year, that part of being an entrepreneur is being a bit delusional. Like, you have to be a little bit delusional in terms of people saying to you, how are you going to do this? Or is this possible? And you have to say, because I'm going to, and yes, it is possible, full stop, tunnel vision. And so as hard as it is for anyone else that's listening to this, and if you needed to hear this today, tunnel vision, you got this. We're here as well. If you ever need people to talk to, these lives and things that we're doing, we're going to do more of so that people know that there are spaces having the same conversation. So yeah, we will get through this period. And then I really feel like it will be so much better because there will be the right types of individuals that come in and say that can never happen again. And, because the world iteratively changes, is still a possibility, but we're going to really think about it in that most optimistic way. And in the meantime, we need to support, we need to figure out how to be creative, innovative, et cetera, to have this be future-proofed and sustained.
Thank you so much for that, Jason. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate this conversation that we've had today as well. Thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your day. Thank you for opening up a firm like this, a firm that I wished was around when I was coming up too. So thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, folks, we're just going to put up our QR code here. This is going to help you understand how to get in touch with the fantastic folks at BIPOC Executive Search. You can scan our QR code, which will bring you to our site where you can find out about all kinds of things, our executive search processes, and the unique value of our client portal, alongside much, much more. We're here to help you sustain this work during these times. And you've got this. We've got this together. Take care, everyone.